Hartmut, we saw a really impressive bounce for equities in Singapore and Korea when they came back from their Lunar New Year holiday. Hong Kong opening today after its break. What are you expecting to see there?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, the greater China markets, we're reasonably constructive. They had already what we're seeing in some other parts of the world already last year. So in the absence, maybe also of completely, getting the market wrong-footed type of regulations we can see, there for sure, especially also the big internet platforms are reasonably cheap, reasonably good value, and also we're not dealing with rising rates as we know in China. So I think could be a quite constructive setup, especially if we look at the entire year.
Yeah, the internet stocks in China are certainly appealing in terms of price, but they're cheap for a reason, aren't they? Are you confident that the regulatory uncertainties are now behind us?
We can probably not say that everything in terms of regulation is already out, but I think sort of the heavy guns are also that many things that caught the markets wrong-footed last year. I think also probably the authorities have seen the point that they need to provide a bit more transparency on not only what they want to do, but also how they want to do it. And that seems to be slowly settling in. And there's another very fundamental reason as well. I mean, we know that for the last 9 months anyway, for the last year, many of the big platforms went into investment mode again. So typically you take 12, 15 months maybe for those to bear fruit. So you're talking about the second half of this year. So there could, beyond the regulation, there could also be some earnings comeback in the second half that people probably try to price in early.
And Hartmut, of course, the big news this week is the start of the Beijing Olympics, right? Are we going to see any market action related to this major sporting event?
Interesting you asked that. We have actually done quite a bit of work around it. Typically, Winter Olympics are not a big driver for the market. However, we do have also a sort of investment theme open with a sports maker basket. So many names, the well-known ones from the US, from Europe, but also the up-and-coming ones from China. And the idea is also more that they have underperformed because of production issues. Now, we do know that production issues are not structural, but they tend to perform, especially the sort of Western ones, if you will, 12 months ahead of big soccer events. Right? And we have the one in November coming up. So this is probably something more likely to be a driver than the Winter Olympics.
What about some of those more secular stories around the region? What is sort of the theme going into 2022 later into this year?
I think in our region we have a couple. Of sort of structural stories. I think so. The internet names, or I should say the Chinese internet names by now. That there's more than Chinese names, as we know. They provide good value, but also we look at some of the healthcare areas. They have also suffered actually last year in terms of performance. So some of those were more interesting to pick up by now. And last but not least, of course, Asia, or especially also China, Korea, Japan. Really market leading in many of the green technologies. So there's a lot to choose from.
Hartmut, we did hear from the ECB a little earlier, a hawkish hold really from Christine Lagarde, joining the RBA really as one of the more too dovish central banks in the developed world. Which one of these two is going to move first, and what do you see it doing to the currency pair?
RBA is moving first. We think also you have to bear in mind that for the ECB, what comes in and complicates everything a bit is that they have to keep the currency together. So we also do think probably more towards 23. We also may see moves on the rate side, but they're still not going to be the first ones. It's a bit difficult for them. They have different economic areas, as we all know, so they're not going to be in front of the curve compared to others.